Some loves are fleeting, while others are eternal. His heart had carried her memory for years, though time had tried to fade it. He had moved on, or so he thought, until fate pulled him back to the place where it all began. Standing there once more, he felt the echoes of a love that refused to be forgotten. Some connections are not bound by time, and some stories are never truly over. The cafe was unusually quiet that afternoon, the soft hum of conversations blending with the gentle clinking of cups against saucers. He had come here 100 times before, always ordering the same black coffee, always sitting by the window, watching the world pass by. But today was different. Today the world seemed to stop. She walked in with an effortless grace, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something unseen. She wasn't the kind of beauty that demanded attention, but rather the kind that drew you in slowly, deeply. There was something familiar about her, though he was sure they had never met before. And yet, when their eyes locked, it felt as if the universe had shifted. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time stretched between them, heavy with something neither could name. Then, almost as if fate had orchestrated the moment, the only empty seat in the cafe was at his table. She hesitated, then finally walked over. "Mind if I sit here?" Her voice was soft, unsure. He gestured to the chair across from him, forcing himself to look away before he lost himself in those deep, knowing eyes. The first few minutes passed in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable one. It was filled with a quiet anticipation, an unspoken understanding that neither of them could explain. Then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, they began to talk. It started with small things, what she liked to read, how he always found peace in the sound of rain, how she could never drink her coffee without sugar, and how he never took his with any. They laughed over their little contradictions, over the irony of meeting someone who felt so much like a reflection, and yet so different all at once. The cafe slowly emptied around them, but they remained, caught in a world of their own. Hours passed like minutes, and soon, they realized the sun had begun to set, casting golden hues across the city. "I should probably go," she said, but there was hesitation in her voice, as if she wasn't entirely ready to leave. He didn't want her to go either. "Maybe we could meet again?" The words left his lips before he had the chance to stop them. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile. Maybe, but she didn't give him her number. She didn't promise anything. Instead, she left him with the kind of hope that was both thrilling and terrifying. For the first time in his life, he believed in destiny. Days passed, and he returned to the cafe, hoping to see her again. He convinced himself it was silly, that she was just a stranger who had left a lingering impression. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Then, on a day he had nearly given up hope, she appeared once more, as if time had folded in on itself to bring them back together. "You again?" she teased, setting her cup down. He grinned. "I could say the same to you." And just like that, they fell back into conversation, as if they had always known each other. It wasn't forced, it wasn't rehearsed. It simply was. Each meeting felt like a continuation of the last, as if no time had passed between them. They talked about everything and nothing, about their dreams, their fears, their childhood memories. She told him how she had once spent an entire summer painting sunsets, trying to capture a feeling she couldn't put into words. He told her how he had once sat in an empty train station for hours, watching people leave and wondering what it felt like to belong to someone. And slowly, without either of them realizing it, their lives became intertwined. It wasn't an earth-shattering kind of love. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was quiet, gentle, like the first hint of dawn after a long, dark night. It was the kind of love that didn't ask for anything, yet gave everything in return. One evening, as they walked through the quiet city streets, she stopped suddenly, turning to face him. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked. He thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't. But then I met you." Her eyes softened, but there was something else there too, something unspoken, something distant. She didn't say anything after that. Instead, she reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his as if she had done it 1,000 times before. And in that moment, he knew this was love. But love, no matter how strong, was never simple. And soon, they would come to learn that time, though it may stand still for a moment, never stops moving forward. The days that followed felt like a dream neither of them wanted to wake from. Their time together was unplanned yet effortless, as if the universe had conspired to bring them to this exact moment. They met in familiar places: the cafe where they first spoke, the quiet bookstore where she traced the spines of forgotten stories, the bridge where he liked to stand and watch the city breathe beneath him. Each meeting was a thread, weaving something unspoken between them. Their conversations carried the weight of things left unsaid, moments that felt like memories before they had even passed. She spoke of her love for the stars, how she believed every soul had a light that never faded. He told her of his fear of time, of how he worried it would take away the things he loved before he even had the chance to hold on to them. But even as their connection deepened, time began to pull them in different directions. She started to distance herself in small, almost unnoticeable ways. She would hesitate before answering his calls, cancel their plans with vague explanations. When he asked if everything was all right, she would smile, always that same soft, knowing smile, and say, "Some things are too beautiful to last forever." At first, he convinced himself it was nothing, that maybe she was just afraid. Maybe she needed more time to say what he already knew, that she loved him as much as he loved her. But the truth was more complicated than that. One evening, they met at their usual spot, a quiet park tucked away from the noise of the city. She sat beside him on the bench, her fingers curled around the edge of her sleeve, as if holding onto something only she could see. "I have to leave," she finally said, breaking the silence between them. His chest tightened. "For how long?" She hesitated before answering. "I don't know." His mind raced for something to say, something that would make her stay, but all he could manage was a whisper. "Why?" She turned to him then, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't before: pain. A quiet, unbearable kind of pain. Because life doesn't always wait for love. Her words were soft, but they cut deeper than anything he had ever known. He wanted to argue, to tell her that love was life, that it was the only thing worth fighting for. But looking at her now, he understood. This wasn't a choice. It was something bigger than either of them. That night, they walked together in silence, both pretending they had more time than they did. When they reached the cafe where it all began, she stopped and looked up at him. "Will you wait for me?" she asked. His heart ached at the question, because he already knew the answer. "Always?" She smiled, and for the first time it wasn't sad. It was full of something else, hope. But hope, like love, was never enough to stop time. And as she walked away, disappearing into the city lights, he felt the weight of the one thing he had always feared. Time was moving forward, and she was moving with it. The days that followed were a blur of empty spaces and unanswered questions. He still went to the cafe, still sat by the window where she once sat across from him, but the seat remained empty. The echoes of her laughter lingered in the air, teasing him with memories of what once was. He told himself he would be okay, that time would dull the ache in his chest. But time had never been kind to him. It had taken her away, and now it refused to let him forget. He wrote letters he never sent, traced the outline of her name in the condensation on his coffee cup, replayed their conversations in his mind until he could hear her voice as if she were still beside him. The world kept moving, but he was stuck in the space where she used to be. Then, one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, his phone buzzed. It was a message. From her. "I saw the stars tonight. They reminded me of you." His breath caught, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something close to relief. She hadn't forgotten. She was still out there, thinking of him just as he was thinking of her. He typed back, his fingers shaking. "Where are you?" The response came minutes later, but it felt like a lifetime. "Somewhere far. But I miss you." 1,000 words sat on the tip of his tongue, but none of them were enough. "I miss you too." That was all he could manage. And so began a different kind of waiting. She sent him messages at odd hours, sometimes with pictures of places he didn't recognize. a crowded train station, a quiet riverside, a bookshop filled with stories he would never get to read with her. She never said when she would return, and he never asked, because deep down he was afraid of the answer. Weeks turned into months, and though they spoke often, the distance between them never closed. Then one evening, as he was walking home through the city streets, something stopped him. A bookstore. The kind she would have loved. Without thinking, he stepped inside. The air smelled of old pages and quiet stories, the kind that waited patiently to be discovered. As he ran his fingers along the spines of forgotten books, a familiar ache settled in his chest. He had spent so much time waiting for her return that he had forgotten how to live without her. And that realization terrified him. That night, he sat by his window, staring at the sky. Maybe she wasn't coming back. Maybe love wasn't about waiting. Maybe love was about learning how to carry someone with you, even when they're no longer by your side. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then finally typed a message. "I hope you find what you're looking for." He didn't expect a reply. But when his phone buzzed moments later, his heart pounded in his chest. "I already did." "And it was you?" His hands trembled. He wanted to ask what that meant. But something told him that, this time, he would have to wait just a little longer for the answer. The message lingered in his mind long after he had read it. "I already did." "And it was you?" He read it over and over again, as if the words would somehow change, reveal a hidden meaning, or give him the closure he had been searching for. But they didn't. They only left him with more questions, more longing, more silence. He thought of replying. A simple question. Then why did you leave? But something in his heart stopped him. Maybe he was afraid of the answer. Maybe he already knew it. Days passed, and though her message stayed at the top of his screen, she didn't send another. He didn't either. He told himself he would move on, that he had to move on. But moving on was never as simple as people made it seem. He tried. He went out more, surrounded himself with friends, filled his time with things that should have distracted him. But no matter what he did, she was always there, lingering in the spaces between moments, in the quiet pauses of his day. And then, one night, just as he had started to believe he might be able to let go, it happened. A familiar song played as he walked past the cafe where they had spent so many hours together. The sound of it stopped him in his tracks. His heart pounded, his breath caught in his throat. And then he saw her. She was standing by the window, just like before, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee, her eyes distant, lost in thought. He told himself he was imagining it, that his mind was playing tricks on him. But then she turned, and their eyes met. Time slowed, just as it had the very first time they had seen each other. She hesitated, then stepped outside, the door swinging shut behind her. The streetlight above them flickered softly, casting shadows on the pavement. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, she whispered, "I didn't think you'd still be here." His throat tightened. "I didn't think you'd come back." She looked away, as if searching for the right words. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed. "I thought leaving was the right thing to do. That if I put enough distance between us, maybe I could forget. Maybe it would hurt less." His heart clenched. "And did it?" She gave a sad smile. No. The weight of everything they hadn't said hung between them. The unanswered questions, the unspoken emotions, the love that time had tried, and failed, to erase. "I missed you," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He swallowed hard. "Then why didn't you come back sooner?" She exhaled shakily. "Because I was afraid." He frowned. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that after everything you wouldn't still be waiting." Silence stretched between them. And then, slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. "I was always waiting." She let out a quiet laugh, half relieved, half broken. "I know." And in that moment he knew. She had never stopped loving him. She had only been waiting for the right time. And maybe that time was now. The night air felt heavier than usual, thick with unspoken words and the weight of time. She stood in front of him, the same yet different, like a dream that had faded at the edges but never truly disappeared. He had spent so long imagining this moment, rehearsing what he would say if he ever saw her again. But now that she was here, all the words escaped him. She shifted, wrapping her arms around herself as if bracing for something painful. "I know I don't deserve this," she whispered. "I don't deserve your time, your patience, or for you to still be here." His heart ached at the way she said it. He wanted to tell her that love had never been about deserving, that it wasn't something measured or earned. But instead, he asked the question that had haunted him for years. "Why did you come back?" She exhaled shakily, looking up at the sky as if the stars held the answer. "Because no matter how far I went, no matter how much time passed, I couldn't forget." Her voice trembled, and for the first time, he saw the depth of her regret. "I thought leaving was the right thing. I thought we were too young, too reckless, that we would end up hurting each other more if we held on. But the truth is, losing you was the only thing that ever really hurt." His hands curled into fists at his sides, not out of anger, but out of frustration at the time they had lost. The what-ifs swirled in his mind. What if she had stayed? What if they had fought harder for each other? What if time had not stolen so much from them? "Do you still love me?" The words left his lips before he could stop them. He hadn't meant to ask, not like this. Not when his heart was still so vulnerable, when the wounds she had left behind were still healing. But he needed to know. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if she was memorizing his face all over again. "I never stopped," she admitted, her voice breaking. Something inside him shattered and healed all at once. He had waited so long to hear those words, but now that he didn't know what to do with them. He took a slow, measured breath. "And if I say I don't know if I can do this again?" She nodded, as if she had expected that. "Then I'll understand." He stared at her, searching for any sign of hesitation, any sign that she would run again. But all he saw was a woman who had made mistakes, who had carried regrets, who had loved him all the same. "I don't know if I can pretend like nothing happened," he admitted. "I don't know if I can forget the nights I spent wondering where you were, if you ever thought about me." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't want you to forget," she whispered. "I don't want to erase what happened. I just want to try again." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "What if we get it wrong again?" She let out a soft, sad laugh. "Then we'll get it wrong together." And maybe that was what love really was. Not something perfect, not something that always made sense, but something that endured, that found its way back even when time tried to erase it. He took a step closer, hesitating for only a second before finally pulling her into his arms. She melted against him, her fingers clutching the fabric of his jacket, as if afraid he would disappear. But he wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. As the city moved around them, as the stars burned above, he realized something. Some stories don't end just because time tries to rewrite them. Some stories, some loves, are written in the stars. And no matter how much time passes, they always find their way back.